Welcome back, fellow geeks and horror fans, and welcome to the second series and episode 4 of Horror Stew. So I want to thank you for watching the channel. Of course, I hope you've enjoyed the content so far, and I want to thank you for watching the previous series about why Night of the Living Dead is the best horror movie, or not the best horror movie, but the most important zombie movie of all time. And then the additional conversation about the different actors, directors, and everything else. So today we're going to do a little bit different, not zombie related, but it is horror related. And so recently I went back and watched a movie that I had never seen before. I'm not sponsored, but if you've never checked out Shudder, go check out Shudder.com. It's actually a horror movie catalog, and it's a streaming service made specifically for horror movies. Shudder, if you want to sponsor me, sponsor me. But the reason I mention this is because I actually found this movie on there just by chance. It was one of those movies that I had never heard of. In fact, it was something that I looked at it and I was like, this looks like a cheesy 80s campy movie, which don't get me wrong, I enjoy. But I was really concerned about the potential quality and if I would even like it. So I gave it a shot and I said, you know what, this is actually a really solid horror movie. And then I embarked on the franchise, as one does. You know, you watch the first movie and then you immediately dive in and you watch the entire rest of the series because you're enjoying the movie. And I don't really... the horror movies are really some of the movies that really invite me to do that. There are other series, of course, that have done that for me, but specifically this series really drew me in, and it was really surprising because when it comes to horror movies, I don't expect much out of 80s horror movies or 90s horror movies or really any horror movies, just because sometimes there's horror movies to be horror movies. So when I saw this movie and I watched it, I really enjoyed it and was surprised with the depth of the movie, believe it or not. But it was a movie called Sleepaway Camp. So if you have never seen Sleepaway Camp, I would go ahead and go watch it. It was a movie from 1983, and it's funny to think about because it was such an interesting movie that I'd never heard of. And I really enjoyed being able to sit down and watch it, especially as a new viewer in the 2000s, specifically 2020. That's what 17 plus 20 is 37 years ago this movie came out. So Sleepaway Camp, for all intents and purposes, is a typical slasher film, except for in today's lens, it kind of just seems generic. But when you go back to 1983 and you think about the films that were around during that time, this movie was revolutionary. So that's actually what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about specifically Sleepaway Camp, the first one, but we're also going to talk about some of its subsequent sequels and follow-ups, and we're going to give a little bit of an analysis to the series, and additionally we're going to talk about some of the actors, specifically the titular character in the series, who we'll learn about shortly. So stick around, we're going to get that going here for you, so I hope you enjoy. So today we're going to start off talking about Sleepaway Camp, to kind of talk about the first film first and to kind of discuss, what the film is about, some of the main tropes of the horror film. So first and foremost, the first Sleepaway Camp was in 1983, and the titular character in all of the Sleepaway Camps, all of the Sleepaway Camp movies is about a character named Angela. So in the very first movie, she's actually played by an actress by the name of Felissa Rose. So Felissa Rose played her in the first film and then in one of the later films. And Felissa Rose is actually she's a pretty great actress. She plays a young Angela in this film. And so this is a spoiler alert, obviously, before I continue, and somebody gets mad because, I'm over here spitting spoilers. The first Sleepaway Camp, and you can check out the poster there, the first Sleepaway Camp, it follows the character Angela going to camp. Angela is a shy child, and what we elude this from is that the reason she's shy is the epilogue of the movie. The epilogue of the movie shows her father dying in a lake at the hands of, we assume, either camp counselors or campers driving a boat recklessly. and we assume that she survived, and this is what, led her to kind of being reserved, quiet, everything else. So she goes to camp, and when she goes to this camp, obviously you have all of the tropes of a horror slasher flick involving a camp, right? Obviously, we had the film Friday the 13th prior to Sleepaway Camp. That was in 1980, so 3 years prior. And we had many similar films revolving around a camp of some kind prior to Sleepaway Camp. But what Sleepaway Camp did differently is, instead of having some mysterious monster like Jason Voorhees, or there's another movie, The Burning, I believe it was, where the individual was a previous, not camp counselor, but like a janitor of the camp, or like a maintenance man. So it wasn't an adult figure who was the killer. It was actually believed during the film that Angela's cousin, I cannot remember his name now, but the child cousin was actually avenging Angela's bullies, basically the people who would bully her for being quiet, or bully her for this, that, or the other, that he was actually going through and taking care of the individuals doing that to her. And so the movie progresses. There are various topics in the movie that are brought up, even serious things like child molestation. Yes, a 1983 movie legitimately insinuated that the character Angela was about to be assaulted, which for that time it's kind of I don't want to say edgy, but in a way it's edgy, because that really wasn't something that was something you would put in a movie. You know what I mean? That wasn't really something that we talked about. But it was very real and very realistic, and that's something that I can appreciate about the movie, is that they're talking about real issues. They're not just, okay, hack and slash, murder. No, they're talking about legitimate issues that are present in the 80s to today. You know what I mean? So that was something that I was really surprised to see, and they put a very surprising spotlight on that event, which then was followed up with rifle retribution by murdering the individual who had tried to enact that violence. But something I wanted to kind of touch on with this film is that in a modern light, it may not take a little bit, because if you watch the film with today's standards, I definitely feel like the movie may not fit the bill in a way, because the film itself is fine all the way up until the end. The ending is a little bit of so from a horror movie perspective, the ending is fantastic. It's a twist that you never would have seen I never saw coming. But essentially what happened was, and this is again a spoiler, and if you've ever seen Sleepaway Camp, you know this scene. This scene right here is the end-all, be-all of the film, okay? So the reason I'm not touching on the middle also is because it's just a bunch of murders. We've already touched on who we think was the murderer during the film, and it actually turns out that the murderer is Angela. So as you can see here, this is a very, in my way, it's a very shocking element from the film. Actually legitimately scary. And something that was interesting about this was that Angela was actually being forced to be a girl. Angela was actually male. And now this actually, and the reason I said this may not fit the bill for now is that people may insinuate that this is disingenuous to the transgender community, because it's depicting Angela's mother as forcing her to be a girl because her daughter died in the lake, right? So because what we understand in the beginning is that the father and one of the children dies, but then we see that Angela is alive. So we assume that the female child from the lake is who survived to be Angela, but we would be wrong. What actually happened was that the female child died. The mother couldn't take the stress of her losing the father and one of her children. She disassociates and forces her son to live as a woman, as a female, which in the end you actually see a shot. And this is also something that I'm surprised that they put in the film, I'm assuming it was an adult body double, but you do see frontal male nudity in this film. So I would say be very careful watching this, because you are going to see some things that are probably uncomfortable, because it made me uncomfortable. But as a film person, as someone who loves film, I enjoyed the movie. The ending was surprising. I would probably much rather enjoy a. I understand why they did it, but I would probably, this is one of the few times that I would probably enjoy a little bit of censorship, because I really wasn't anticipating seeing that, and it kind of made me uncomfortable, because they're insinuating that this is a teenage child, that is they're underage, and obviously the body was not an underage individual, but they are insinuating that it is an underage individual. So you draw those comparisons, and it's a little uncomfortable. It's a little uneasy. Like, again, the movie's great, but in today's society, even then, I feel like that was a little edgy, a little too edgy for the times. But regardless, Sleepaway Camp is a quality film. Sleepaway Camp movie, the first one, great. Felicia Rose is fantastic as a child Angela during the time, and the movies then progressed, of course, from Sleepaway Camp 1. Now, I'm not going to touch too much on all of the movies. There are some that I want to highlight. There are 5 in total. And so the next one was Sleepaway Camp in 1988. So the Sleepaway Camp in 1988 was actually played by a different individual, and Angela was played by Pamela Springsteen, who is actually related to Bruce Springsteen, the musician. But Pamela Springsteen plays Angela in the Sleepaway Camp 2 and 3 as the titular character. So this film is it's a little bit different, because it basically goes under the assumption that you have seen Sleepaway Camp 1 and you understand why Angela is a serial killer. So in this one, they assume basically they take the step that Angela is now a camp counselor at a neighboring camp. Yep, you heard that right. She went to an insane asylum. This is what they say. She went to an insane asylum. She got everything that she needed, that in terms of her care, and then they thought that she was okay and released her. Upon her release, however, she starts killing again. And so in the 1988 Sleepaway Camp 2, basically we're treated to just constant murder. I mean, from start to finish, she's killing people. And they don't blanket it, they don't cover it, they tell you straight up, this is who the murderer is. Which is very interesting for a slasher film in the 80s, is that typically there's that level of suspense that makes the movie good, right? But in this case, there is no element of suspense. There doesn't need to be an element of suspense. Because in this movie, as well as Sleepaway Camp 3, we're vividly aware of who the murderer is. And we're okay with that. So back to Sleepaway Camp 2. So Sleepaway Camp 2 specifically, it talks about how she's a camp counselor and she's murdering the children who don't fit the bill of being good kids, and she actually protects one of the more innocent children of the camp who, was a virgin, who doesn't do drugs, who doesn't have sex, who doesn't do this, that, and the other. She's protecting that individual because she sees herself in that individual. And then in addition to that, she very blatantly and obviously kills other people because they don't fit that description in her mind. So it's actually a really interesting take on, the classic horror movie trope of, if you have sex in a horror movie, you're going to die. Or if you do drugs, or if you drink in a horror movie, you're going to die. It's classic horror movie trope. So this movie kind of, in a way, was a little meta by saying that it's not just a trope. It's actually her reasoning for doing the things that she does, because she had so much trauma from her childhood into her first experience at camp, that then she would then enact additional vengeance on campers in the second and third film for that same reason. So in the third film, it actually approaches it a little differently. Everybody knows who Angela is at this time. She kind of went under the radar of the first one, but after the second one, she was definitely, everyone knew that she was a murderer. So she actually was on the run. So on the run, doing everything else. But then the camp from the first movie reopens under a new name, under new management. but and this is interesting too, and this I don't think would sit well either, because it very vividly plays on the stereotypes of the people who are, disenfranchised and the people who are systemically put down. They are actually specifically character tropes in this movie. Everybody in this film, there's two groups essentially. There's the people who are rich and the people who are poor. People who are rich are white, and the people who are poor are minorities. So it's kind of a rough. It's a little rough because, speaking from a place where I understand privilege, I feel like this is not a genuine representation of minorities, irregardless of the decade. I obviously understand that horror movies are classically, I don't want to say malignant, but classically they play on the trope that if you are a minority, you die first. I mean, there are entire tropes that are dedicated to that. That being said, they definitely play up on that trope a lot in Sleepaway Camp 3, so that was something I didn't really enjoy. But I guess if you can kind of you can kind of just push that out of your head for a minute to just enjoy the movie, it's possible. Obviously, when you watch a lot of old horror movies, you really, really, really have to understand that these were different times. Obviously, that's no excuse, but regardless, if you want to watch the movie, please do. But I'm obviously giving you a fair shake here, telling you why you may not want to watch it. But regardless, Pamela Springsteen, she enterprises her role in this movie as, Angela, of course, and then they go to the camp and, everybody dies. I will say this, the killing is equal. She equally kills everybody in the camp, regardless of their stature. Now, the next film that we're going to talk about is Sleepaway Camp 4. So Sleepaway Camp 4 actually came out in 2010. But it was, this one's funny. Actually, I take that back. It came out in 2012. But this one's funny because it was originally filmed in 1992, but the project was completely canned. And then in addition to the project being completely canned, they, for some reason, thought it would be a good idea to take what little footage that they filmed in 1992 and then put it in the film in 2012. But there was no new footage in 2012. They just pieced together footage from the first three movies. So Sleepaway Camp 4 is not good. All right, I'll be the first one to tell you that, I can enjoy a movie just to enjoy a movie. I don't have to have spectacular production value to enjoy a movie. Some of my favorite all-time movies are these movies that were made on less than a shoestring budget. Clerks, Evil Dead, Night of the Living Dead, so many more that I can name off the top of my head, but I'm having trouble here drawing a little bit of a blank. But this movie, it had the budget, but they canned the project, and instead of just saying, maybe we should make a different film, they tried to do what so many people try to do, and they tried to put together pieces that don't fit together. So you could probably skip Sleepaway Camp 4. Not really that great. But it's one of those things where, like, I watched it just to say that I watched it, but I wouldn't watch it again without purpose, for sure. So those are the main title entities of the films. Sleepaway Camp 1, 2, 3, and 4. Like I said, 1 through 3 are right. They obviously have their issues, especially in a modern eye. But Sleepaway Camp 1 is honestly one of those films that has one of those endings that you don't really expect, and it kind of burns an image into your mind about how and why the murderer did what they did. And in a way, you understand. Yeah, obviously, one of the worst parts of a horror movie is when you understand the killer. But the last thing we're going to talk about is actually, I would consider a remake / reboot of the franchise that kind of skips over some of the intermediary stuff and actually is surprisingly good. So the last film that we're going to talk about in the Sleepaway Camp series, in my opinion, is the last film in the series. I don't really count Sleepaway Camp 4 just primarily for the reasons that I've mentioned already in this, this episode. Not a very good film, period, just because it just doesn't meet up to the expectations that I feel like you would need to meet to be a part of the series. So Sleepaway Camp 4 is really a throwaway for me. Couldn't even finish the film, to be honest. But so the last film, in my opinion, will be Return to Sleepaway Camp in 2008. Now, keep in mind, this is a straight-to-DVD film because it's just a straight-to-DVD film. I mean, what else can you say? Watch it, you'll understand. It's not a bad movie. So let me preface this by saying it's not a bad movie. I'm not gonna sit here and I'm not gonna shit on the movie because honestly, it does have its couple of twists and turns that are really kind of creative in a way. But the issue that I see primarily with the Return to Sleepaway Camp movie is that it does seem like it's a little low budget, and it does seem like that it is not up to the same expectations that I would see with the other Sleepaway Camp films. But regardless of that, it does have some very interesting facts, or I should say some really interesting assets for the film. It kind of follows a similar premise to Sleepaway Camp 1, where there is a disenfranchised individual, individual who is, they actually, in the film, they're depicted with a disability, who is relentlessly picked on, and there's somebody who is attempting to avenge the slights against this individual. Now, it's kind of an in-between on whether or not they were actually trying to avenge the slights or if they were just killing to kill. Obviously, again, spoiler alert, I'm talking about the movies, I'm going to tell you exactly what's happening. But actually, it's revealed at the end of the film that Angela had returned. And it's actually Felicia Rose from the first film who actually came back. And earlier I showed an image of the ending of Sleepaway Camp 1 here. So I'll keep that up there just for a second so you can get it fresh in your mind. But they actually recreated this scene and Return to Sleepaway Camp. Pretty cool. And in my opinion, that's the worth the cost of admission. Just because the film wasn't horrible, it really wasn't. It was your typical 2000s take on a slasher film, but it was, in my opinion, it was trying to pay homage to an original film from the 80s, and it did so by very much, I would say almost, I don't want to say shot for shot, but it is very similar to the first movie. It is very similar to the first movie. So similar, in fact, that the final reveal is similar. They even have one of the camp counselors from the first film come back, and he acts like a crazy person during the film because he's like, Angela's back, and then it turns out Angela is back, so he's not crazy. He just probably has PTSD from when he literally saw a bunch of kids get butchered in the 80s. But it's really good, actually. The Return to Sleepaway Camp has a lot of really positive, stuff. Like I said, it's almost a shot-for-shot remake of the first one, with Angela being the titular antagonist in this case. But it's interesting how they play it out, and it's interesting how they see it actually come to fruition. So I'd recommend watching it. It's not by any means the worst movie I've ever seen, and it actually has some pretty interesting twists and turns and some modern takes on, honestly, some of the kills from the first movie, which was actually a little refreshing. So ultimately, not a horrible movie. It didn't do great in terms of money, but it is good to go back and take a watch at it because it honestly, it kind of embodies what the first film did, but it's kind of putting it in a more modern setting. So give it a look. Don't give it a look. I don't care. But for right now, I think that's going to do it for me. We've talked a lot about Sleepaway Camp, and like I said, keep in mind that these movies amongst all movies, any movie that I talk about, I'll probably mention this again, but any movie that we watch in 2020 from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, even the early 2000s, they sometimes have those hard to kick tropes. Enough of that though, just understand that these films are old films and they should be taken as such. The first Sleepaway Camp is pretty great, in my opinion. Like I said, it introduces a female, antagonist who, we really didn't have that too much. As specifically they are the only antagonist. Obviously, Friday the 13th Part 1 with Mrs. Voorhees was the primary antagonist. Also, seeing a child commit these atrocities. Obviously, we had some other films in prior years. You have Child's Play, which isn't necessarily a child, but it's a child's toy, and it's specifically targeting children. Pet Cemetery, Omen, Children of the Corn, Village of the Damned, even. So you have all these other films that obviously play into that ideology of a child specifically being the antagonist or being the aggressor. But this film definitely kind of takes it to a new level because they take it to a more psychological level, that this person's not just, evil, that they're psychologically damaged on something that was happening to them. So it has a lot of depth to it, I think. Like I said, there are some definitely things about these movies that would not hold up today. Like, I would not make a movie shot by shot of any of these films for that matter. But take a look, don't take a look, it's up to you. But at the end of the day, we're all enjoying horror, we're all enjoying being geeks, so let's stay that way. But at the end of the day, have fun, stay safe, stay happy, and stay healthy, and keep on growing. We'll catch you next time on Horror Stew.